So, as I'm sure a lot of you know, we live in a very blessed time because of the internet. When it comes to gaming, there's not much information that can be hidden that hasn't already been, in some way, shape, or form, documented on the internet, which in a lot of cases makes it very easy to play something like a Metroidvania like Metroid Prime. Even though navigation is pretty difficult in that game, because of the fact that the information is laid out for you online, you can at some point figure out where you are, figure out where you need to go, and that friction point that the game honestly uses as its selling point becomes a lot easier to digest and beat. And while I admit in my own personal time that I have definitely used these guides and tutorials and many other things like that to my benefit in order to not only understand a game, but beat a game in a lot of cases in my younger years, recently I had an experience with Pokemon Fire Red that makes me believe that honestly the opposite of figuring things out, going into things with enough information, enough information that you can understand where the game is coming from, understand what the game is about, but at the same time, it doesn't give you everything you need to know so that you can fill in those blank spots. And I believe that to be a really enriching experience, which is not something I would have said from a Pokemon game. Now, before I get fully into my point, I feel it's very necessary actually that I tell you my history with Pokemon Fire Red. So, to make a very long story short, I was not a Pokemon kid when I was a kid. I was a Digimon kid, and I didn't see really the appeal of Pokemon for the longest period of time. However, one day in school, Pokemon Fever was, coming up to a high. I think it was only a few months away before Diamond and Pearl released, and I decided to get Pokemon Fire Red just to see what all the hype was about. And this was my first RPG ever, and I did not understand why the game functions like it did. Now, to give you an example of the games that I was into when I was a kid, it was Marvel vs. Capcom or The Legend of Zelda. These were Ocarina of Time specifically. These were the two games that I bounced between the most, and I really liked video games where essentially you can control every action a character can make. Not only that, but the games were more or less self-explanatory. Like, even though not all the information is told to you in Marvel vs. Capcom, the goal of the game is very obvious to see. You beat up the opponent, and when their life reaches zero, you win. In The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time specifically, the game will tell you what certain buttons do, how they have different context depending on what item you have in them, and it has a lot of recreatable moments. Like, for instance, if you light a stick on fire in Ocarina of Time and the stick burns up, chances are you can do it again with another stick. However, a lot of the things in Pokemon felt very random. There was no cohesive glue to the whole experience. And since my copy of Fire Red was secondhand, it didn't come with an instruction manual, so I couldn't understand or ascertain what was going on in the game. I didn't understand why certain moves were ineffective against this Pokemon, super effective against that, and then just no text for another. Why certain, at random times rather, critical hits would come through. And the most frustrating thing about this to me was evolutions. I didn't understand the concept of evolutions at all. Yes, I had a paradigm of it from Digimon. However, Digimon always process it as something that can be controlled. Pokemon, it just happens. There is no real reason for it. And I remember this so clearly in my mind. I reset my save file when I was a kid because I was so bewildered with this, and I tried to understand like what happened to my Charmeleon my Charmander that made him suddenly into a Charmeleon. And I tried to, recreate it with every other Pokemon. It happened at, I think, level 16 with him. So in theory, it should happen with all of them. And it didn't. And it frustrated me so greatly, I returned the game. That was a decision of a child. But, anyways, years go by. Fire Red and Leaf Green come to the Switch, and I purchase it. And okay, so it's also something to mention was that after I returned Fire Red when I was a kid, I had at some point went to my grandmother's house and I came down with something. I don't know what it is, or what it was rather. But at that time, I was laying on my grandmother's bed, and there was a series of Pokemon episodes, reruns of Ash's first adventure in Kanto that were playing. And by essentially being a captive audience, I had gotten into Pokemon that way. And, then the aforementioned Diamond and Pearl was coming out, and I got super excited for it. And I went to get the strategy guide, or rather, my dad got me the strategy guide before the game came out. And I spent, I don't know how many hours reading that guide back and forth, and particularly on the Pokeballs and how the type matchups went. And, well, more so the Pokeballs than anything. The type matchups, I glanced at, but anyways. When that time had come for me to finally play Diamond and Pearl, I had a much better understanding of how the world of Pokemon worked. And because of that, I enjoyed the game so much more. That's not to say, I was suddenly an expert because I had the guide by my side. I still struggled here and there throughout the game. Nevertheless, enjoyed it. Then years went by, was still into Pokemon, got out of Pokemon in the 3DS era, and here we are back at the Switch. Okay, great. So, Fire Red and Leaf Green come out. I decided to get it because, hey, I never really played this version of the game, and when I did play it, I didn't understand it so well, so I feel that as a grown adult, knowing what to expect from this series, I can much appreciate the game. I can more so appreciate the game than I did when I was a child. And I did. For the most part, I would say my experiences with Fire Red have been a very standard Pokemon affair, from what I'm used to playing from the DS era. Now, here's something that caught me completely off guard. Dual typing. This is not something that is brand new to me. The DS era of Pokemon games had this all over the place. However, I never really put much stock into thinking about dual typings until Fire Red and Leaf Green when I encountered a Tentacool for the first time. Now, again, Tentacool in and of itself is not like a super rare Pokemon. He's all over the place in Gen 4. But I was using a Gloom, and I used Absorb on it, and I noticed the text didn't say it was super effective, and it had me thinking, like, something is wrong here. And I went to use Poison Powder only to find out it's not effective on Tentacool. And in an instant, I went, okay, this thing is a poison type. I gotta get a grass type, not a grass type. I gotta get a electric type move out to actually do super effective damage. And it was that moment. It was it couldn't last more than 30 seconds of experimentation, right? But in that moment, my brain was thinking. It was firing on all cylinders. Okay, that's an exaggeration, but my brain was trying to figure out why I didn't get my expected outcome from this situation, and it's because I never really engaged in. Basically, all the Pokemon that I know of from Gen 4 onwards, I know like the back of my hand, except for being Tentacool. Even though he's in that game, I never really messed with that particular Pokemon in that kind of way. If anything, he was just like experience fodder. Nothing I really put too much stock in until this moment only a few days ago. And so that stuck with me. And I would thought, okay, well, I didn't really think much of it other than that very interesting moment where something didn't line up to my expectations. And then I get to Koga's gym. I don't know what it's called. I don't remember the city that's in. My Switch is right here. I could look it up and whatever. And then turns out in his poison type gym, he has psychic type Pokemon. Kadabra, and I think there was an Alakazam. I don't know. And that threw me for a loop. My expectations for the Pokemon series up to this point is that if a gym leader is, the leader of a particular type of gym, he will use that particular set of Pokemon for that gym. And here's Koga's gym just, doing his own thing. And that was a very interesting experience for me. Yes, it doesn't line up with the expectations that, talking to the, guy at the front gate of the gym led me to believe, but it was a much more, for lack of a better term, organic kind of experience. Like, when you go up against a Pokemon trainer in any area of the game, you don't necessarily know what they have. So, all bets are off. But when you go up to a gym leader, now all of a sudden there's an expectation you can utilize a particular Pokemon. It doesn't, for the most part, if they have a good attack stat, it doesn't really matter what their level is, because the type matchup is so intense, so damaging to certain types of Pokemon, that you can overcome the level differentiation going on there. And here is a Pokemon trainer who's not following the rules. He's essentially a random trainer you find in the wild in a gym. And it's like, whoa, like, okay, let me slow my roll a bit. The cool thing I'm trying to illustrate about this is that it was unpredictable. Even though it was a slight change due to the fact that there is a limited amount of poison types in Gen 1 that can be used, this change was humongous to me. And the game didn't really stop there, because Giovanni's gym didn't have full ground types. I think Blair's gym didn't have full fire types. I don't quite remember at this point in time, but that's okay. Irregardless, Gen 1 does not have enough Pokemon to fill out all the requirements a gym leader needs to, have a full gym of people to go up against. But that ends up leading to its benefit, because I couldn't predict this happening. And I had to get on my toes. Like, there's certain types of Pokemon that I would use that was strong against one but weak against the other. And that definitely happened in Koga's gym. I'll tell you what. But in particular, for this talk, I want to highlight the Elite Four, because I could not have predicted the situation I would have gotten myself into. Now, as you can ascertain from me returning the game only after my Charmander became a Charmeleon, I didn't get far into Gen 1 at all when I was younger. But when I got to the Elite Four as an adult, my highest level Mon was level 47. My weakest was 43. So relatively even distribution spread. However, there was a lot of unevolved Pokemon in my roster: a Kadabra, a Graveler, and a Dratini. No, not a Dratini, a Dragonair. Because at the last second, I said, hey, you know what? I never raised a Dragonair. I'm going to do that now, for whatever reason. And there were 3 fully evolved Pokemon in Blastoise, in Pidgeot, and Jolteon. Okay, so up until now, I haven't really had much of a problem. The only issue I have is that Dragonair really isn't pulling his weight due to the fact that he doesn't have any particular stats that he specializes in. I mean, I guess I attack, but not really at level 43. But other than that, I haven't really had much issues throughout the game. I basically snoozed through the whole game up to that point. And then I get to the Elite Four. And who's the first? It starts with an L. Loris, or I couldn't tell you their names. They escape me. Actually, only the first lady escapes me. I remember the others. But Ice type, right? Oh, and an Arcanine. Sorry, I think I forgot to mention I had an Arcanine. That's 6, right? Yeah. So, anyways, no, I sorry, scratch that. I didn't have a Kadabra. I had an Arcanine in its place. I had a Kadabra in my PC, but I wasn't using him at the time because I didn't think that I didn't think that he could pull his weight. But more on that later. So, anyways, I had an Arcanine, And the first Elite Four member said she was a user of Ice type moves, and I'm like, okay, I'll send an Arcanine. Dugong is the first Pokemon out, and I didn't pay much attention because in Gen 4 you don't pay much attention to it. You just set your Fire type out and you just go for it. I didn't know that Dugong was a Water type. I just didn't know. And so it uses Surf. I get almost one hit KO'd, and I went, okay. I immediately had to pivot to Jolteon. All right. So her first thing of Pokemon were primarily Ice types and a Lapras, which learned Ice Beam. But okay, nothing like too out of the ordinary. That's my fault. Technically, because I did catch a Dugong, but I wasn't paying much attention to its typing. Second Elite Four member is Bruno. And I look at his overworld design, I'm like, okay, this guy's a fighter. Yeah, that makes sense. Send in Pidgeot. Onyx is his first Pokemon. And I went, oh, okay, switch into Blastoise. Take it out with Blastoise. All right, Blastoise took a little damage, whatever. Nothing to lose sleep over. Hitmonchan's up next. I gotta send in Pidgeot. I know the deal. I'm gonna use Fly. It's gonna be over like that. He uses Sky Uppercut. And I have never heard or seen, no, more accurate to see, seen how Sky Uppercut works in the game. So if you don't know, Sky Uppercut will hit a flying type Pokemon irregardless of the fact that it used Fly the same turn. I felt like I was getting countered. Like, I don't know how to explain it. It's amazing. I couldn't explain the level of shock on my face that Bruno had given me. And because Sky Uppercut could hit Fly, hit Pidgeot at Fly, there was nothing I could do. So another thing I want to explain from Gen 4 is that in Gen 4 and Gen 5, that when you hit Fly, your flying type Pokemon is basically invincible. I rarely ran into an issue in the single player specifically of these games where trainers have moves to counter Fly. But here's Bruno with Sky Uppercut, and immediately my strategy falls apart. Excuse me. In that moment, I am forced to pivot, and I didn't pivot well. I lost to Bruno because Sky Uppercut existed, and I didn't know. I didn't know how to handle that. And so I ended up throwing my Pokemon back at the Elite Four a number of times, and at a certain point, I realized this isn't working out. I need to make some major team switches, and here's the interesting part of how I started thinking with, not knowing as much information, is that I needed more information on how the gym leaders work. Now, here's the part where I was talking about earlier about how the internet is such a blessing in this day and age, but how it can also hamper you. So, hamper your enjoyment specifically, not hamper you. So, in this moment, I felt the temptation to just look up what the Elite Four had because the information's online. I used this information in the past when playing Diamond and Pearl, Platinum, specifically Platinum, when playing White, and so on and so forth. There's nothing that I thought of that I hadn't already thought of before. However, I noticed the lack of information I had in that moment made the game more interesting to me because I didn't know. I didn't know how Sky Uppercut worked. I didn't know, what Dugong's typing was. These mysteries ended up making Pokemon Fire Red so much harder for me and so much more entertaining in order for me to beat. So it also came to the point where, I got up to Agatha, and that's not, by the way, did you know that despite Gengar having legs on the floor, Earth-type moves don't affect him? I didn't know that. I didn't know that. So, Graveler ain't doing nothing. So, like, that's a might as well be an empty slot on the Pokemon list. But like that's like so much knowledge checks are going on that I don't know. And after a while, I stopped thinking of I gotta beat the Pokemon, the Elite Four, and instead I started thinking, okay, I need to get to Lance. All right, I need to get to Lance. I need to see what Pokemon he's using because once I know, I can now create a strategy to counter him. And so that eventually happened. In which case, I figured out he had an Aerodactyl, a Gyarados, and I know that he had a Dragonite. Like he's one of the only trainers in the game that he had a Dragonite, but that's like kind of through cultural osmosis. So I was able to better plan for that. Long story short, went on a grind session, got myself a Dragonite, got my Pokemon up to level 50 because okay, here's the thing, and here's what was like messing me up the most was Agatha and her Gengars, right? So yes, I had a Arcanine and I had a Blastoise, both of which knew Bite. And I gave the sunglasses to Blastoise because, of course, I did. Anyways, they knew Bite, but they're not Dark types. So the damage cap that they can do is limited unless I level them up. And the biggest problem I was running into with Agatha was the fact that I really didn't have any hard counters to her. And in addition to that, something that I kept thinking about a lot was the fact that I did not sorry, I thought I saw something there. Was that I did not have another Switch so I can actually do trades with myself. So a lot of the Pokemon that I was using up to that point are only in their mid-stage evolutions. They haven't reached their final stages because game design. So a lot was going through my brain. To give you a rundown of what Pokemon I had at that, at the rematches was a Blastoise, Jolteon, Pidgeot, Kadabra, Arcanine, and a Dragonite. So basically the team is roughly to the nines in terms of attack power, and there's some defense in there, I guess. But because of Kadabra being basically a glass cannon, I didn't know for a fact if he could take on Gengar and survive, right? And then something interesting happened in that moment too. I'm looking at the Pokemon stats, and I'm looking at Arcanine, and then I look back at Kadabra, and I noticed they're the same speed stat. And from the matches I've had before, I noticed Arcanine was, outspeeding the one Gengar anyways. And I'm, suddenly it's like, oh, dude, of course, I can use Kadabra here, and Kadabra will just wipe out most of the party, in theory. In theory, it can actually work because the last Gengar that Agatha uses goes for Hypnosis Nightmare. And that's actually a part of the strategy that you can play too, because for a fact that Kadabra will not die in one hit against that particular Gengar. So you can actually run a weaker Gengar against her and win. Here's the thing though, he's still a glass cannon. So if anything attacks him physically, it's over. So I got pretty confident, right? So I take out Gengar. In one hit. Awesome. Great. I'm feeling good. Next one is not Crobat, Golbat. And I had a Jolteon in the back. And I'm thinking, nah, I'm good. The Golbat, outspeeds me and takes out Kadabra in one hit. I don't... and now I'm scrambling, trying to put the pieces back together because I got a little too overconfident and I don't have a fully evolved Pokemon on my hands that has super effective moves against this Elite Four member. So a lot of scrambling, a lot of things that was not able to go well, went well actually. I did end up beating Agatha. However, I was really hurting for resources. So this is a part of the story I didn't mention up to this point. But I was not really like I wasn't really paying attention to catching Pokemon until I encountered a random Zapdos and then an Articuno and then a Moltres, and I think, oh yeah, legendary Pokemon exist. Let me go get some Pokeballs and catch these things. I make it sound like I ran into them and then ran away. I didn't. It popped by back into my head when I saw, when I saw like the Pokemon factories, and I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute, isn't like a Zapdos supposed to be? Yeah, okay, I'll go and catch that, but I need Pokeballs, so actually I gotta make a 180 and go to the store. Anyways, I was doing fine on money for the longest point in the game. And then I went legendary hunting, and that went out the window. So, I was hurting a lot on resources, and because I was losing a lot as well, the Elite Four was eating into those resources, and it basically came to the point where I used up all my hyper potions. I had 3 revives in my pocket, and I had 3 max potion, whatever one gets rid of the status effect. I had 3 of those left, right? But I remember thinking this. Okay, Lance has an Aerodactyl, a Gyarados, and a Dratini, right? So in theory, if I just carry Blastoise, Jolteon, and Dragonite into that fight, I win. Like that's it. I just win. And for the most part, that is what happened. Here's the thing, though. I was still at a level deficit from Lance. And for the most part, it didn't really matter, right? Even though I was at a level deficit, Jolteon is super effective against Gyarados. Doesn't really matter. Interesting point. You know what? I'm going to save that. I'm going to save that. That interesting point is more interesting in the next fight. So Jolteon takes Gyarados to the cleaners. Blastoise scoops up Aerodactyl, and then Dragonite, my Dragonite, takes out Dragonair, takes out another Dragonair, and then comes the last Dragonite. So going into this, I knew, because I looked up, I looked at what Dragonite's stats were, not stats, typing, and I saw flying type, and I went, I got it. I can beat the speed differences with Jolteon, and I'll use Thunder in order to take out Dragonite as fast as possible. He won't be able to set up. He won't be able to do any big damage. I got this in the bag. Dude, did you know that Dragonite is not affected? Well, he's not super affected by electric type moves. I didn't know that. And so I used Thunder. The Thunder animation plays, and he's still standing. And I went, oh, no. And so then begins the scramble. Lance uses Outrage. Outrage hits, and then it hits again, but he gets confused, and Jolteon is literally on the magic pixel. I don't think I have footage of this. Sorry, I didn't have footage of this. I didn't think I'd be recording. I didn't think I'd be talking about this situation. But anyways, at the last pixel, I said, okay, you know what? I'm just going to use Thunder Wave, because I know that paralysis lowers the speed of whoever is affected by it. So I can negate the speed difference between his Dragonite and my Dragonite by just playing the odds. And you want to know something? It worked. And then Dragonite was immediately paralyzed, which stopped it from taking out Jolteon. I got my own Dragonite in, and then I began work cleaning it up, and it worked, right? All this planning ended up paying off. However, there was one more fight against Gary, and I paused. I paused. So up until this point, Gary has not been an issue. I've put 0% thought into fighting Gary. But because of what just happened to me with the Elite Four, because of the unknowns, like the unknown moves, the unknown typing, the unknown what this Pokemon is affected by, I literally stopped and had to think. and I did my best to remember all of the Pokemon Gary had used up to that point. And I was thinking, what is the one thing that walls me? Alakazam. That's it. If Gary sets up a Calm Mind on Alakazam, I am not able to beat him. At least not with the current team that I have. Mind you, my highest level Pokemon is Dragonite at 55. Everything else is somewhere in the 50s, low 50s at that. So this is not like a close thing at all. However, I decided so I made an executive decision. And I was actually wrong early when I said I had 3 revives. I had 2 revives. I used one of the revives earlier to bring back Kadabra because I think he got KO'd by Bruno. I don't remember entirely. Anyways, I had 2 revives. 3 Pokemon fainted. So I had to make a judgment call and bring back 2 of them. The one I didn't bring back was Pidgeot because I had realized that in all of my strategy, all of the other 5 Pokemon occupied a spot that was going to be either effective against Gary's Pokemon or effective against Elite Four in general. And Pidgeot's kind of just there, like, to be honest. I don't know, like, I could say words about Pidgeot, but I think the fact that I left it fainted says enough. Anyways, at this point, I only have 3, like, either Max Potion or whatever the other thing was. It wasn't Max Potion. It was a thing that brought the Pokemon out of a status ailment and healed them to max. I don't know what it's called. But I only had 3 of them left in my bag. I go to Gary, and dude, this is actually the most intense match to me in the game. Like, again, it didn't matter how many times I beat him before. The thought only occurred that if that Alakazam sets up and beats all my Pokemon, I'm going back to the start. And I have to do this whole thing over again with less resources than I had. So I was thinking so long and hard about which Pokemon I should send out first. Do I send in Arcanine and try to anticipate him starting with Alakazam first? Or do I send in Jolteon, expecting him to start with Pidgeot, and steamroll there, and on the off chance that he doesn't start with Pidgeot, I can use Jolteon's speed to paralyze it, and then give myself a better chance at steamrolling Alakazam from there. Ultimately, I went with Jolteon because there was too many pluses and not enough minuses for me to not consider him, and Gary sends in Pidgeot, and Dude, I popped off so hard. I was so happy that I ended up calling it out. Even though I'm pretty sure Gary, up until this point, has started with Pidgey the whole time, but I just never took notice of it because I never had to take notice of it. But in this one game for all the marbles, in which case I've been losing so many times up until this point, that decision was it had so much weight upon it. I don't even know how to explain it. Like, Gary was not a problem. Okay, like, spoiler warnings, I beat him very easily. Gary was not a problem. However, the struggles that came before him made me consider Gary to be a problem, because if I didn't take him seriously, again, I'd have to start from scratch. And, like, this was the experience that was afforded to me by being forced to figure it out. And that's why I said earlier that in a lot of cases, we are blessed by the information we have at the internet. There is nothing that we cannot know at, seconds. It only takes seconds for you to type something in and hit enter. But at the same time, that level of information, that level of access can hamper a person's fun. I would not be talking passionately about Pokemon Fire Red and me getting schooled by the Elite Four for hours on end and being forced to grind and come up with a strategy against them if I could just look it up and, have the information dead offhand. Look, at the end of the day, my whole point of making this video is to encourage people, hey, take a step back from the internet and try to figure a problem out. This is actually completely unrelated to Pokemon Fire Red, but I had a similar thing in Metroid 2 on Game Boy. I was playing that for the first time in my life, and I was stuck finding one of these Metroids. My dad comes in and asks me, son, why don't you just look it up? And I tell him I'm not looking it up because if I do that, I'm going to forget about it and I'm not going to have a memorable experience with the game. Turns out, dude, explaining what this Metroid is, it's like the most complicated thing in the world if you never played Metroid 2. But basically, there is like this under the main level. This is area 1 of the game, just so everyone knows. It's like under the main level, and you can see like this Metroid husk there, but there's no obvious way of where this Metroid went. And then I fell through the floor into the lava that didn't burn me, and then I traveled to what felt like an out-of-bounds glitch to find the Metroid waiting for me there the whole time. It was a completely organic experience. I'm not going to say that it was like, one of the best decisions I've ever made in my life. It took me hours to find that one Metroid, but it's a story that has stuck with me ever since I did that. Like, I keep thinking back to that moment of like, okay, that was kind of painful, but at the same time, I remember that moment so sharply in my mind. And that is what I'm trying to get to. That is the heart of this whole video, is that, look, you may want to progress through the game. And that is a valid want. You bought the game, and it is 100% up to you on how you want to decide to go through it. And I'm not saying you do this as a lifestyle, you do this with every game, but for some games where there is friction, from some games where, the friction is the appeal, like the unknown is the reason why you're here, don't look things up. Just try and figure it out. Obviously, again, if you want to at some point, like you tried for hours and didn't come up with an answer, by all means. Like, this is not applicable to every game. Castlevania 2, Simon's Quest is the most infamous example of you need a guide to beat this game because like it's not obvious on how you progress. But I say all this to say that it also made me realize something very important about Pokemon, and that one of Pokemon's biggest strengths as a series is the unknown aspect of it. The fact that you don't know what all the Pokemon's weaknesses are, that the fact that you don't necessarily know all the Pokemon in a given generation that's new or that you haven't seen before. That unknown factor is such a great... It's such a great thing about Pokemon, and it's something I haven't thought about in years. Like, this journey through the Elite Four almost brought me back to that exact moment I beat Cynthia in Gen 4. Like, it's very close. I haven't gotten this excited at beating a Pokemon game in a long time. And you can tell how excited I am because this has been a 40-minute session. I didn't see that one coming. Anyways, hey, thanks for listening to me ramble. I made a thing. Nah, forget it. Hey, thanks for listening to me ramble. And okay, so actually, one last thing as a final point, I wanted to highlight the fact that this would not be a contradiction to the video I made beforehand about what a good tutorial can do for a game. If only because going into this, I said beforehand that I needed information to even, enter into the world of Pokemon and engage with it. So what I said in that video still stands. However, the one thing that I will say is that there has to be a taper off point, like a point where the information, stops coming in and the player is allowed to engage with the system, allowed to come up with their own plans and strategies, things that work for them specifically from their own experimentations with the game that they have done up to that point. So, with that being said, hey, thank you all for watching. I will see you all next time. God bless. And one last thing I forgot to mention about the hyper potions or max potions that the Elite Four and Gary use. So something interesting that I noticed about when a Pokemon redlines, when a Pokemon redlines, their health goes red. That is when the Elite Four members slash Gary will give them a max potion. However, some of them carry citrus berries. So if they're, citrus or orange, one of those berries. Anyways, the point is that sometimes when they hit red on their health, they will actually bring their health back to yellow, and that will prevent them from the trainer from healing the Pokemon. So what ended up happening? Oh, and also if a Pokemon redlines multiple times, that will then force the trainer to utilize the max potion as many times as possible. So what ended up happening during the Gary fight was Gyarados. Jolteon kept getting Gyarados to redline. And Gary healed Gyarados 3 times in a row. Dude, I felt so good about myself. I was like, dude, yes, I got him to use all of his max potions right here, right now. That Alakazam is toast. Dude, the Alakazam comes up. I send out Arcanine, all right? And I'm counting on Arcanine's speed to be faster. It's not. My Arcanine, I think, is like level 50 something here, and Alakazam is 57, so he clean outspeeds me. But I'm not worried, right? If Arcanine bites it, it's all good because I still got Blastoise in the back, and Blastoise got a lot of defense. It's all right. I can take one loss. Arcanine gets Alakazam to redline. Gary uses a max potion, and I'm not, dude, I almost put the game down and walked away. I walked around my room and I came back. I think the game was still in my hands, actually, now that I think about it. But I was like, dude, I got outplayed. I thought I had him the whole time, and he had one more in his pocket. So thankfully, the AI fumbles. It uses Future Sight twice. It misses the second time, and Arcanine is able to KO Alakazam. But dude, for a second there, it looked bad. Whoo, man.